The synagogue bells chimed faintly in the distance, but they weren't meant for Matthew. He knew that well. On that sweltering morning, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the tax collection booth, illuminating piles of gold coins and worn-out scrolls. The room smelled acrid, a mixture of sweat and metal, reflecting the hard labor of the collectors and the oppression felt by the peasants who came to pay their dues. Matthew sat on his sturdy wooden chair, his hands firm on the table, watching the comings and goings of people who avoided meeting his gaze. He was a man isolated, both by choice and by consequence. His heart felt heavier than the taxes he collected. He wasn't welcome among the Jews, who saw him as a traitor, a servant of Rome. Among the Romans, he was merely another disposable employee. Matthew knew that his wealth was never enough to fill the growing emptiness inside him. Every day, he stared at the cracked mirror on the wall and asked himself, "Who am I? And why is this never enough?" That morning, as he recorded another payment, something different happened. A commotion grew outside. A group of people, visibly moved, followed a man dressed in simple garments but radiating an extraordinary presence. Matthew glanced out of the window and felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard of this man before. People said he healed the sick, restored sight to the blind, and even forgave sins. His name was Jesus. Jesus walked with steady yet gentle steps, as if every movement was planned to touch the hearts of those around him. His eyes, piercing yet kind, seemed to see beyond appearances, delving directly into the essence of each soul he encountered. Matthew leaned forward, curious, and then it happened. Amidst the crowd, Jesus stopped, looked directly at him, and smiled. It wasn't a smile of judgment or contempt, but an invitation. "Matthew," Jesus called, his voice firm yet filled with tenderness. "Follow me." Time seemed to stand still. The coins in Matthew's hands slipped and fell onto the table with a metallic clink. He felt a mix of disbelief and fear. "Why is he looking at me? Why is he calling me?" he thought. He glanced around, as if seeking an escape, but Jesus' eyes remained fixed on him. It was a call that broke through his defenses, reaching the deepest, most forgotten parts of his soul. "Me," Matthew stammered, almost in disbelief. "But I'm a tax collector, a sinner." Jesus took a step closer, nearing the narrow doorway. Tilting his head slightly, he replied with the serenity of someone who already knew how the story would end. "I didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners." "Come, Matthew." There was something in that voice that Matthew couldn't ignore. It was as if each word dissolved the invisible chains that bound him to his past. He knew the choice lay before him: to continue the life that enriched him outwardly but impoverished him inwardly, or to take a leap of faith and follow someone who promised something greater than he could ever imagine. Slowly, Matthew stood up. His fingers, which had so often clung greedily to taxes, now trembled as he let go of the scroll he was holding. He took a hesitant step toward the door, and as he crossed the threshold, he felt a wave of freedom he had never experienced before. The coins he had once valued so highly were left behind as he followed Jesus down the street. The crowd around murmured, "Him? The traitor? How can Jesus accept someone like Matthew?" But Matthew didn't hear them. All he felt was an indescribable peace. For the first time, someone had seen him not for what he did, but for what he could become. Later that evening, Matthew hosted a banquet at his home. The guests? Other tax collectors and sinners, people who, like him, lived on the fringes of society. At the center of it all was Jesus, speaking and sharing bread with each one, as if there were no distinctions between them. Jesus' words that night were like balm for wounded hearts, a reminder that God's forgiveness was not limited by titles or past histories. "Teacher," Matthew asked at one point, tears in his eyes, "why did you choose me? There are so many others more worthy." Jesus looked at him with a smile that lit up the room. "Because you were lost, Matthew, and that is why I came, to seek and save the lost." Outside, the Pharisees whispered among themselves, indignant, "How can he sit with sinners?" But Jesus, as if knowing what they were saying, spoke aloud for all to hear. "The healthy don't need a doctor, but the sick do. I desire mercy, not sacrifice." That day, Matthew's life changed forever. The man once known as a traitor to his people became a fervent follower of Christ. He left behind not only his wealth, but also his shame, and he found a purpose no amount of Roman coins could buy. Matthew became not just a disciple, but also an evangelist, whose words would inspire generations to find the same grace he discovered when he heard Jesus call. And so, Matthew's story echoes to this day, reminding us that no one is beyond the reach of God's love. When Jesus calls us, he doesn't see who we were, but who we can become. If Jesus were passing by today, what would you leave behind to follow him? What parts of your life are you still holding on to when he is offering you something greater? Perhaps today is the day to hear his voice and respond to his call. Matthew's story teaches us that it's never too late to change. If this message touched your heart, share it. You might be the instrument that helps others hear Jesus' call. The story of Matthew invites us to reflect on the choices we make and the impact they have on our spiritual lives. Like him, we often hold on to things we believe are indispensable: material possessions, status, or even the weight of our past mistakes. But Jesus sees us differently. He looks beyond what we show the world and calls us exactly as we are, with all our imperfections and weaknesses, offering a new chance to begin again, a purpose far greater than we can imagine. Matthew, in his role as a tax collector, lived surrounded by wealth, but also by disdain and isolation. When Jesus called him, he didn't question his past choices or point out his flaws. He simply invited him to follow. And at that moment, Matthew made a decision that changed his life forever. He left behind not just his wealth, but also the emptiness it could never fill. By following Jesus, he found freedom, peace, and a purpose that would last forever. Matthew's transformation teaches us that it's never too late to change. God doesn't care about who we were, but about who we can become. He doesn't focus on our flaws, but on the potential we have in his hands. It's a call of hope, a reminder that we can leave the burdens of the past behind and walk toward a life of purpose and grace. Like Matthew, we too can let go of what holds us back and trust fully in the plan God has for us. Now, let me ask you, what do you need to leave behind? What is taking up space in your life that could be filled by God's transformative presence? Perhaps today is the moment to take a step of faith, let go of what limits your journey, and follow the call that Jesus has for you. He doesn't call us because we are perfect, but because he is perfect in love and mercy. If this message touched your heart and gave you a new perspective on God's love, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your action could be the answer someone is waiting for to find hope. Also, take a moment to follow our channel and activate notifications so you can stay connected with messages that strengthen faith and illuminate the path. Share in the comments what resonated most with you in this story, and if you'd like, include your prayer requests. Together, we can spread the message of the gospel and reach more lives with the hope and love that only Jesus can offer. May your journey be blessed, and may you find peace and purpose in every step you take.